This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast here on the We Made This podcast network. My name's Mark Adams and I am one of your regular hosts, and I'm alongside Kurt North. Hello, Kurt.
Smeg off.
Oh dear. We've also got Colin with us. Hello, Colin.
How you doing?
I'm all right. It's been moments.
Yes,
It's been a week. It's been 7 days, Mark.
Sorry, of course it has.
I've been in stasis.
Remember, we do this live.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, we are talking about episode 2 of series 1 of Red Dwarf today. We're talking about Future Echoes. And fess up time, this is my first time hosting like this. I've been on plenty of shows where I've been a guest like on this format, but this is the first time I've hosted, and I suspect I'm going to be a little bit preppy. So if it's shite, it is completely my fault because I'm a novice.
Hey, go with the flow. Go with the flow. Maybe what will happen is that you'll see like future versions of yourself, and you can correct it just before that happens.
I mean, that would be useful.
All very confusing.
Or is it too determinist to actually think about that, and maybe that you just do the same shite that you did when you saw yourself do it in the future?
Right. Before we talk about this, seeing as we are talking about travelling in time and meeting ourselves, I am a gay. I would definitely have sex with myself. Would you? As two heterosexual men,
Would I have sex with Colin?
Would you have sex with yourself, or maybe just a hand job?
I think the latter. I think the latter definitely.
I'm not even sure time travel is a prerequisite for that.
Right, the thing is, having sex with yourself, you know exactly what you'd like. I'd be awesome in bed for me.
Well, this has taken a turn that I didn't expect. But yeah, I would feel like, what's the best word? Yeah,
bi-curious?
No, I wouldn't necessarily say bi-curious. I would feel a bit strange with me looking down at myself. Absolutely. But yeah, I think you know. Ooh, you know how to hit the right marks.
I would definitely know how to hit the right marks. Moving on.
Future echo time.
Yeah, let's talk about Red Dwarf rather than having sex with ourselves. Yeah. Anyway. We have the theme tune, which we talked about in the first episode, which is still brilliant, and I still love the models. And we see, for the first time, the Holly recaps, which is a part of the show that I really, really like. And having watched ahead, there's an element which is kind of like the general recap, and then there's the lol afterwards, which is just Norman Lovett at his finest, in my opinion. What did you think about the recaps?
I actually really like the recaps. You forget that, you know, as I say, they drop them later on. It's like anything in TV. I think that, you know, you'll have a premise that needs to change after time. But, you know, it totally feels to me like the Star Wars crawl. That it's kind of like their version of it. And I never really thought about the end lol as well. I think that works really well. But it also like sort of just defines what the show is in a very quick format, doesn't it? And I know that they do that in season 3 with a Star Wars crawl as well, but I like it. I think it's quite unique, and it's also the whole idea of the floating head, which instantly makes me think that potentially that David Lynch might have stolen that from Red Dwarf personally. But that's my thought on it. Colin, I don't know about you.
I think it's of its time. I don't think I particularly missed them later on, but it's an extra opportunity for getting a joke in.
And it's an extra opportunity to see some more Holly, which is never a bad thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think that then, speaking like we did last week, that was maybe a Norman Levitt thing, that he might have pushed that himself?
I don't know.
It does seem like he had a lot of sway, so maybe you're right.
Yeah, if what we were saying originally last week, that Holly was much more of a less humorous part, where he was more of a straight man kind of thing, and he brought more of his stand-up into the role, then yeah, it could easily have been him angling towards, let me do this bit at the start with a joke.
So we then move on to Lister talking to a food machine that's got a lisp, and it's a bit broken, and instead of nice food, he gets a bucket, and Rimmer turns up and is rude to him. Rimmer's doing his run, and then we get that was funny as it was, but we then get the wonderful scene where Rimmer asks for a clean uniform and a crew cut, but he's rude to Holly and ends up with a bouffant. Young me, like 10, 15-year-old me, would have to pause at that point to laugh because I was in such hysterics over a bouffant. It's still funny, and I'm 41.
You know what I like about that, though? I think that it's the fact that, again, Rimmer's like thinking, you know, I'm going to be the man of action. I want a crew cut. I want to be I want to be the man. I want to be the action man. I want to have the doll. You know, I want to be the figure that's going to be, you know, the do all and be all. And you know, I don't care who I have to get through to get it. And then Holly just goes, right, well, I've got complete control over you. You are my action man.
And he doesn't know. He believes that Holly's done what he asked him to do. So there's that whole bit of dialogue where he's talking as if Holly has cut his hair, and then he finally looks in the mirror, and I look like a complete and total tit.
This was just after he said that his hairdo makes him feel like a man.
Yes.
It is a magnificent bouffant as well.
Yes. Yes, a beehive, I believe, is the style.
Helen Shapiro, he says, and that does date it. We talked about in a previous episode how it's kind of timeless. That kind of dates it.
Yeah.
It does. But what I like about that directly after is that he assumes the kind of the peculiarness of of it. It's like, so, I quite like this hairstyle. You know what I mean? I do like the fact that he kind of takes on that persona as well.
One thing I've noticed rewatching this is how fucking good a comedy actor is Chris Barry. Oh
Yes.
my!
His timing's great. Like we said last time, his face. He's I cannot imagine Red Dwarf working with a different cast. And that's probably why one of the multitude of reasons that the American pilot failed.
Oh, we don't have to do a podcast on that American show, do we?
I've never seen it, so I'd quite like to do it. And I've been like super, super positive about British Red Dwarf. I'm looking forward to being a bitchy old queen about that tosh.
And don't forget Crichton's in the American pilot as well.
Yeah.
So it's that we'll get to that. I think we have to do an episode on that without a doubt. But that's for another day.
Not for a while.
Not for a while.
We briefly mentioned about the food dispenser. That was voiced by Tony Hawks, not the skateboarder, the comedian Tony Hawks, who turns up various other times later on in the series as different characters. He's the compere in Backwards, is the one that he's most sort of recognisable as.
I've seen Tony Hawks in like a lot of panel shows and stuff, but I hadn't clocked that he'd ever been in Red Dwarf. But now you mention it, yeah.
He was the warm-up guy. He was one of their studio warm-up guys to warm up the audience before, like in between scenes while they were changing the sets around, which is how he sort of got the role. They also apparently had Eddie Izzard in for one session as a warm-up guy, but because of all his stand-up, his sort of long setups of a joke, it didn't work at all as a warm-up, so didn't go down well.
Grief. You have so much obscure knowledge. I just turn up and go, I fucking love Red Dwarf, and you've got actual useful knowledge.
Well, I see, when I was first into it, I was so obsessed with it that I just absorbed everything. So I used to get every issue of the Red Dwarfs magazine, which had all this, there were quizzes in the magazine which had questions like, who was Kylie Gwenlyn? And I felt that as a Red Dwarf fan, it was my duty to revise this kind of thing and know that Kylie Gwenlyn was the producer of Androids, the soap that Crichton watches. And
wow.
It's all this sort of deep cut knowledge. And then it's so weird because I then shut off where I finished watching it and haven't watched it for for years and years and years, but all of this random sort of knowledge is still there. It's like, I'll know obscure stuff about music, and I've obviously got a section of my brain for completely useless knowledge, which is only ever useful in podcasts.
Good. You can come back next series.
That's the plan.
Can I give my useful knowledge here now as well, or useless knowledge?
Yes.
Please do. I've got none.
This episode wasn't going to be originally episode 2.
That's right.
It was going to be episode 4, I think.
Yep.
And there was a few decisions that were made that they decided that they wanted, the way that it was described was that the sci-fi element to it wasn't going to really connect with the audience, but as they filmed some of the episodes, it just wasn't feeling quite right, so they moved this to episode 2. And I think as a part 1 and a part 2, you've got the opening scene, the opening episode with the end, and this one being your sci-fi trope and thing. I think it works to the juxtaposition of both of them, that you get this intimate sitcom story, and you still get the sitcom elements in this one, but the sci-fi elements really core to those sci-fi geeks. But they were really, really concerned about people understanding it, even to the point where people on the crew were concerned that they weren't quite understanding what, and I'm sure we'll pick up with that in the centre on one particular scene with Rimmer and Lister. But it's interesting how that they actually got more laughs than they were expecting with the sci-fi, and actually the audience were ahead of the actual actors and crew in some ways, and actually got it quicker than they expected.
Yeah.
And I think this scene actually does have a very, very real and very, very popular sci-fi dilemma, because Rimmer talks about switch me on, switch me off. And this is kind of an Asimovian kind of discussion about sentience and what's alive and what's not alive. And if you switch someone off, have you killed them? Yeah. And that's kind of just slid in amongst all the lols.
It's a deep philosophical question mixed in with the jokes. It's great. It's you've got the hardcore sci-fi ideas. You've got the hilarious sitcom elements, and you've got this sort of like things that if you sit and properly think about it, it'll blow your mind, and clearly has done to me just now.
They have a conversation about the prejudice that holograms come up against.
Yeah.
That's pretty fucking deep.
Yeah.
But you don't spot it unless you're really looking for it.
Yeah.
No, and that is something, as I say, you're not looking for. I mean, in the shows that I've covered of late, that I've actually now trained my brain to look for those things. And as you say, it's these questions that are asked that you can, sci-fi's got a great history with having allegories of whatever, and that's an interesting one, actually. The fact that it's of sentient life and whatever, and the ability to control your own destiny and stuff like that, and and that's another thing that comes into this. It's all about determinism and whether or not your life is set out, or whether you control your own life or not, and that's another kind of theme that runs through it. So this is actually, as a sci-fi comedy, and I know as much as I say about the first episode being, we all said it was a sitcom and it was all about the characters and their journeys and their aspirations. This one's, has the same, but this one poses more questions and is more sci-fi in that regard.
There's just no wasted airtime, is there? No. Everything is just so crisp, and I've always loved Red Dwarf, but rewatching it and planning for this podcast, I think it's a fucking masterpiece, actually. And this scene itself establishes so much. We're not even 5 minutes into the show, and we get Talkie Toaster for the first time, and we get Jim Bexley Speed, and the fact that his kids are going to be called Jim and Bexley, all in this. And we also get something that I think this is going to be a regular part of the show, is Mark's quotable dwarf. We get something that I really quote quite a lot. If I don't think something's very attractive, I will look at it with a kind of scrunched up face and go, ugly, which is another cat quote. I fucking love the cat, and I still do that. I still do that 30 years on. I think we're going to have one of these every single fucking episode.
I know Colin will probably love this as well. I love the fact the fish will call Lennon and McCartney.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. But yeah, I think and the fact that the dog, comes on, he says, "What's that?" and the whole aspect that he doesn't know what a dog is yet. He feels he can take him on.
Yeah,
I think is great. I think as I say, these opening scenes. I mean, that's just fairly obvious to see, but as you say, the layers within the show itself really works from that point of view.
So we then move on to a big flash. And everyone's like, what the fuck happened? And Holly is kind of quite upset and scared about running faster than light.
Yeah.
And I think, again, this is quite heavy sci-fi stuff. A computer that's scared. It's so understated. But again, it's serious kind of sci-fi tropes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I think, and as I say, we'll go back to the Norman Levitt thing and the fact that, he's, but he plays it so well because, as I say, he's like, I'm going faster than light speed. You expect me to do this, you expect me to do that. But and saying that he's got an IQ of 6,000, and it is deep and he is scared. But then to be able to fit in a line like brown trousers time, which I think is his class. I think it's brilliant.
Brown trousers time isn't my quotable dwarf, it's my brother's. Whenever something happens that's scary, he still does this. He will use the term brown trousers time, and he has done ever since we watched this show.
I've been known to in the past, definitely.
It's just so quotable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think, and they've used variations of that during the course of its run as well. They think Kat said it a few times.
Yeah.
With in regards to that. So it's a reoccurring theme that they mention, and but it never fails to stop being funny in whoever says it.
Yeah,
well, it could come across as crass in some ways as well, thinking about it, but it doesn't. But because it's Red Dwarf, it just rolls off the tongue.
So they are deciding whether or not the cat and Lister are going to go into stasis. Rimmer doesn't want them to, but they decide they're going to. And Cat arrives with 10 racks of suits and says the wonderful line, 2 suits is dead, when Lister tells him he can only take 2 suits. But again, more heavy sci-fi elements. And they start having these future echoes, which are strange conversations where Rimmer isn't responding right to Lister when they're having a conversation. And that's so clever. That scene is so clever.
What I really like about this, from a technical viewpoint, is the blocking. So the blocking of Chris Barry had to say those lines and expect the callback, and the crew were really not quite understanding.
Yeah,
they were going through the talk throughs or whatever they may have been doing at that point about that scene with him talking like that. And the crew weren't getting it; they weren't understanding it. And once they started to block the scene, Rimmer's going to be standing there. That Dave Lister's going to walk through and walk past this point. He's going to have that conversation there. He's going to move back here. He's going to follow that line, and he's going to do this. They were kind of understanding, but the audience apparently was actually getting that ahead of what everyone else was.
Yeah.
So when they started talking through that scene, it actually became more apparent that it was actually people were getting it, but they were really concerned that it wasn't going to hit the mark and it wasn't going to be funny. But obviously, when we get the second part of that scene where Dave Lister's actually having the proper conversation with Rimmer, the laughs were starting to come through really quickly, and people were instantly getting, right, that happened 2 minutes ago. You know what I mean? So it kind of, they were just surprised by that actually people were responding that quickly to it.
It's just so clever, and it's the kind of innovation that you see in Backwards as well. They aren't scared of really doing these difficult scenes. It's very, very, very close, but there's one line that his intonation is ever so slightly different.
And it's also, as well as the impressive technical side of how they physically film it, on a comedy writing side of things, it's also a really technically brilliantly written piece of comedy that reminds me of, there's that old Two Ronnies sketch where they're both having phone conversations with completely different people but answering each other, and it reminds me of that kind of thing where it's particularly well, you probably are space crazy and all that bit where, or it probably is deja vu. It sounds like it.
Wonderful.
Just works perfectly. We've said it before, but it's work of utter genius.
And then the cat runs past, and he's damaged his tooth, but it's a future echo. And they get back to the bedroom and find the cat trying to eat the fish. Lister is really fucking clever and predicts exactly what future echoes are before Holly explains it.
Yeah.
And that is a slight contradiction to him being dumb as fuck in the first episode. But I think it's a establishment of how he's actually maybe not educated, but he's actually quite bright.
Street smart, isn't he? I think
Yeah.
that's something they play on a lot. The fact that he is street smart, that he's not stupid by any stretch of the imagination. As you say, he's not well educated. He is literally only above the laboratory rats, but he's still he knows how the world works, and the fact that he can cotton onto those things really works in his favor. And it goes back to what I was saying last week about the fact that he's also an honourable man as well. So the fact that they're building these kind of this character of him over 2 episodes, I think we're going to see the ramifications of that and the stuff moving forward on just how much of a character he becomes.
I think it's probably more that he's not stupid. It's almost like partly laziness and partly that he just doesn't really care. He's not got the ambition to try and bother progressing with things. He's kind of where he wants to be. He's got his plan so that he can eventually. Obviously, his plans had a slight hitch with the whole being 3 million years away from where he wanted to be at that point. But he didn't want to be an officer or anything like that, so he hasn't needed to. But it doesn't mean he's not got the intelligence there.
I think there's something else significant about this scene as well, is the establishment of the fact that the robots are fucking sassy. Both Talkie and Holly are really sassy in this scene, and I love it.
Do you know, I don't know what you think about that. It is something that they keep coming back to. We'll keep having to say this. We haven't seen the Dave ones. They use the vending machines quite a lot in the new ones, but they've always used them. So, like in season 8, there's a scene where Rimmer gets hit by one, by a vending machine. They use like these elements all along the line, and obviously there's a classic one coming up in the future with Toasty, and Toasty's introduced here. But it is an interesting. It's like the Star Wars version of droids, because the droids don't speak, but in Red Dwarf's universe, it's more about the vending machines and the what would be considered lower ranking, like a Lister. The vending machines are of the same kind of class as him.
Yeah,
and I think that they use that to such great effect that it is amazing. It's a great wealth of like a good comedy well to use as well, because you don't necessarily need to have returning characters. You can just use whatever you need to use for comedy effect with vending machines and the like.
We've also, talking about the robots, we've not mentioned the Scutters yet, which they weren't in the previous episode at all, I don't think. But yeah,
they were referred to as service droids in episode 1, but this is the first time they're called Scutters. You're right. Yeah,
and I mean, almost like art imitating life. Or life imitating art. Sorry, the Scutters on the set were almost, badly behaved as they were as their characters, because they were radio controlled. And they used to have problems where they used to get interference from a local taxi firm, which meant that they went haywire. And there was at least one occasion where one of them got interference and accidentally attacked Chris Barry in the bollocks. And
Nice.
I was just before we started recording, I was watching random Red Dwarf stuff on YouTube, and I found an old from 1988 when it had just started. They were on like a talk show. They'd got the Scutters in there bringing questions from the audience to Craig Charles and Chris Barry, and Craig Charles was actually cowering as the Scutters came over because I think he had like one too many run-ins with them in the past.
But again, I mean, your useless knowledge is absolutely amazing. Still getting thanks. But again, the fact that the Scutters are used to great effect over the show as well. The fact that the technology, it goes back to the fact of Rimmer being able to be switched on and switched off again.
Yeah,
they give these robots the robot fish. Don't forget the fish, of course.
yeah.
The toasty, you get, the vending machines, you get the Scutters, all of which have personalities within themselves as well. And they, I'm more of a Star Trek fan than I am a Star Wars fan, but this to me is more of a homage more to Star Wars purely because of the droid aspects of R2D2 having his emotions and C3PO, and some of the things like the ones on the Death Star where they go all that kind of thing.
The
it
gonk
does feel
droids.
like a bit more of a homage to them. So
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the droids, even by not speaking in Star Wars, like R2-D2 doesn't speak, and they are still lovable, almost fleshed out characters. And the Scutters are just like that. They flick the V's at Rimmer at one point.
Yeah.
They pass a note to Rimmer, pass a note to Lister saying, "Don't leave us with Rimmer." And it's just, they're just so sassy and so funny. And you're right, that it's like the light in the Pixar thing as well. How the fuck do you make a light lovable? But Pixar managed to do it. And again, it's an arm on a fucking iron. And these are still lovable. It's just sublime.
There's the other technical bit is Lister's space bike that you see in this episode was a modified Sinclair C5. Not a Citroen C5, that's totally different.
No way.
Yeah, it was a Sinclair C5.
Always wanted one of those.
The reason that it only appears in this episode and I think one or two others is because Craig Charles was so reckless driving it around the set that they cut it out later on because they thought he was going to break too much stuff with it.
Amazing. I love this show. I always loved this show, but analysing it the way we are, I just love it even more.
I tell you what I always find amazing in the very first talk, the don't say the C word when we talked, where you just like sort of took a moment like you just did and went, I fucking love this show. it's like I'm gonna. Where's this been in my life? Why have I let this run dry? But yeah, it is. It's. Do you know what? For me, you mentioned about the fact that you haven't seen it for so long. Red Dwarf for me is always one of those shows. It's like Friends at the moment. Friends is on absolutely every channel known to man. It's on E4. It's on Comedy Central. It's on Netflix. It's everywhere. And Star Trek's a bit like that as well, where I could probably be sitting at home and flick a TV channel on and go, all right, it's an episode of Star Trek, great, I'll sit back and watch it. And Red Dwarf to me is a bit like that because it's available now, especially with it being available on likes of Netflix, where if I've got like a spare 20 minutes, 15 minutes, I tend to put it on, and I've done that for quite some time, so it's always there or thereabouts, and I always just randomly choose episodes. And this one's no different. And you mentioned about things that always come back to you. I always, and I didn't realize this until like today, I always come back to it probably at least once a month, if not more. End up singing Lunar City 7, and I just go Lunar City 7, and I just for no apparent reason, absolutely, it's like a tick. I've got no reason for it. It comes out of nowhere. I'll just literally be like sort of walking, say listen to a podcast or something, and just end up like thinking Lunar City 7. You know what I mean? And it's like you say, it's like these things are instilled in your head.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Friends and Star Trek. I don't think you're wrong putting Red Dwarf up on a pedestal with those two iconic cult hits. I think it's fucking wonderful.
Well, Red Dwarf it actually is displayed in The Big Bang Theory. So the fact that it went over stateside and become a cult hit in the States as well, I think it says a lot about a show that was filmed in Manchester and is so many years old, and it still has the reach of getting into a show as big as The Big Bang Theory was.
Yeah.
At its time, you know what I mean? Because The Big Bang Theory pretty much is the new Friends of the generation. And yet, I know it's a geek show, fair enough, but that Red Dwarf does make an appearance in that show. So, it just goes to show the reach of this little funny little TV show of ours.
Yeah.
So then there's an explosion, and Rimmer has seen Lister die. Lister runs in, and Rimmer is talking about how it was awful, the death, and he's traumatized by it, and Lister's like, it's my fucking death. And Lister then gets it into his head that if he can stop the cat from breaking his tooth, he can stop himself from being killed.
Yes.
And again, clever Lister. Real kind of like proper analytical planning here.
Yeah. And he's really quick to come to that idea, particularly when he's in shock from just being told that, Rimmer saw him die. Rimmer did not give him ample bracing time to cushion the blow. He does come up with that plan under pressure, and it's a good plan. There's perfect logic in that. Unfortunately, it's like Kurt was saying earlier. Is it predetermined? It basically is, because it's already has happened, despite the fact that it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and the reason and the actual thing that had he not come up with that plan, he wouldn't have broke his tooth, because it's actually when he slams his head against the counter, it's Lister that actually causes it. So the fact that happens is again is a genius kind of play on that, and it's a sci-fi trope of like, is your life predetermined or not? This seems to suggest that it is predetermined. It doesn't. Well, it doesn't, does it? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because obviously we find out that that Lister's death isn't Lister's death, but then it wasn't Lister's death in the first place. And if you can understand anything of what I'm saying, good luck to you.
To be fair, is there going to be anybody listening that hasn't seen it? I think that's unlikely. So I think they know what you're on about.
Well, no, it's very unlikely. Yeah.
Rimmer's glee is really, when you actually take a step back, it's really fucking nasty, actually. And again, I'm going to wank all over Chris Barry's acting again, but he's just somehow makes it funny, despite the fact it's really quite horrible behaviour.
It's almost like, and we go back to this analogy of the skull again, where Lister was the cool one, the one that's got all the friends that they're playing pranks on each other, that they're the ones in the corner of the room, getting told off all the time, and Rimmer's the one that's got the rule book and is playing by the rules. But it feels like that he and I've got someone like this in my work actually, as it happens, where I feel like this way. But it feels like Rimmer's the one that's been downtrodden on. We find out later episodes, obviously, some backstory to this, but he's been downtrodden on so much that it's a defense mechanism for him. That he is being an arsehole, he's been a dickhead. He is being arsey to Lister, but it's almost like a defense mechanism because he's in a power struggle, and he feels at that moment that he has that power. But it's not just having been an arsehole for being an arsehole's sake. He's actually doing it because of the stuff that's happened to him in the past, and that's a really deep character trait. And as I say, it goes back to like the characters aren't just there to be an arse. He's actually there because of issues that he's had in the past.
Oh, he's fundamentally damaged.
Yeah.
And again, Red Dwarf really does go quite deeply into this in a way that you don't spot when you're just tuning in because you want a laugh for 25 minutes. But at this point in the show, we don't know any of that. No. And as I say, he's not a very nice person here. And we don't have that background. but it's still done in a way that Chris Barry manages to not make him look like a massive bell end. Well, he does, but in a sympathetic way.
But there's also the aspect in there that it's definitely a retaliation to Lister saying pretty much the same things to him when he's talking about going into stasis towards the start of the episode as well. So, there is a little bit about Lister getting a comeback from what he already, getting what he deserves in some way. But yeah, like we said, we later find out that it was actually not Lister, it was his son, and he's remarkably okay with that. If you just got told that your son's died.
Yeah, that is a flaw, I'll give you that.
Apparently in season 3, there's a change in season 3, apparently, where in the Star Wars crawl, it says that he grew up and left. I know I said I wouldn't do consistency, but it is a future echo, so I'm taking that purely as, it's one potential future, and that future didn't end up happening.
Yeah.
So that's the way I'm dealing with that. Move on, carry on.
Okay, well, I will do that. So, an emergency is going on, another quotable thing from Holly, and the Navicom is overheating. Lister is facing his destiny. He, at this point, doesn't know that it is Bexley, so he's actually really fucking brave, and goes to the scene where he knows he's going to die, and he doesn't die, but he is attacked by the cat.
Every single time I see this, I don't know if Colin's got any backstory to this or not, but I always hear the pyrotechnics go off and a woman kind of go, oh, like that. I don't know if anyone else has heard that or anyone has any history on story.
I don't.
Sorry?
I don't know. I've not noticed that.
But do you know what I mean? Though? Have you heard it?
No, but I'm going to listen out for it later.
I'm probably going to have to go back and watch it now because of that.
It always feels like it's either a member of the audience who's just like a little bit shocked because it sparks up, or it's someone on set, or someone on the stage floor or something. Yeah. Somebody does something, and it feels like it's a bit like, oh crap, I wasn't expecting that. Every time I see that scene, I always like wait for that moment, and it's just instilled in my brain that happened, and I might even be making it up in my head, but I'm pretty sure that I hear that every single time.
The sound bit that always I concentrate on in that scene is the sort of droning synth tone that's just increasing in pitch as Lister does the different things. It really sort of ramps up the tension as he does each thing. It's getting just higher and higher, sort of higher pitched like sine wave tone. And as a synth geek, that sort of always sticks in my head because it sounds ace.
Yeah, it's a great scene and it's really well done. And like I say, it's establishing what kind of a man Lister is. He's outwardly seen as a slob, but there aren't many people brave enough that would have gone in that room knowing, well, at least thinking that he knew that he was going to die, and doing it anyway for the good of everybody else on the ship.
Yeah.
If only he'd been alive 3 million years ago. This wouldn't have happened, and he would have had a full ship.
The drive plate would have been sealed securely, yes.
So they all return to the quarters, and they see a 171-year-old Dave Lister on the bed, who has remembered that he saw himself. So he tells Dave the truth about Bexley, and we now find out that it wasn't Dave that died after all, and tells him to go and run to the medical with his Polaroid. And he is also really mean to Rimmer and calls him over, and then doesn't tell him what his future holds. And I think just the relationship between these two, they're just bastards to each other.
Well, that might be the best form of flattery, really, isn't it? It may, the friendship is born out of that, and how many friends do people have where they banter against each other or take the mickey out of each other and stuff like that? And I know it's not quite there with this just yet, but you'll see that as the season progresses and as the show progresses, that that is ultimately the thing, and obviously Kat gets involved as well. It's the three of them, and I'm sure that there'll be scenes that we're not thinking about right now when we look into the show and later on, where roles are reversed, and it's actually thinking, all right, okay, and that's what's great about it. It's it goes back to the actual smaller moments and the banter between them. Even though this one is a very sci-fi heavy elemented episode, you still get those banter moments.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's intimidating sci-fi though. I think anybody could watch this with even a very small amount of knowledge of the tropes of sci-fi and get it without any trouble.
Definitely.
There's no heavy elements.
My granddad, who will watch any old crap on telly, was watching Red Dwarf last time I was at his house in Tenby. His normal level is Last of the Summer Wine. So he was still watching it and still laughing at the jokes in it. He'd never put on a sci-fi movie or anything like that with any sort of high concept. He's not going to be watching Inception or anything like that, or Interstellar. But yeah, Red Dwarf he could cope with, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think I think later on when things do get heavier, exposition-y, they still find a way of doing it. The perfect one, which again is one of those quotable lines, which will come around, is "What is it?" I say that all. What is it? So those moments where it does get really exposition-y. You've got Kat or you've got Crichton. You've got Crichton explaining, you've got Holly explaining it, and you've got Kat being us, the one that's asking the questions, and and by doing it in a comedy way, that you're able to explain that quite well. But it goes back to the whole point of that sci-fi element that the audience. I think that if you look in TV culture, you get these TV shows that will tell it to you straight. And one of the big things that I've had discussions about recently, and I think maybe a couple of people have mentioned this, is that, around the early times of, say, around this era especially, it's often that you couldn't have people lying on TV because people watching would take that at face value. It's not possible that person lies, and so having a show like this with this sci-fi element and having it done in a way that people get it, is actually trusting the audience that they'll understand it.
Yeah.
And as I say, the crew not knowing or not really getting it themselves, but the audience clicking onto it quickly, just goes to show that if you give the confidence and you play it with confidence, that the audience will actually catch on to what you're saying and how you do it. It's all about the delivery of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Rimmer gets very cross and he calls Lister and Holly, he calls them both goits. Again, goit is a word that I still use today.
Yeah.
If I want to not swear, I will use the word goit.
Yeah.
I don't actually know what it means. Am I saying something horrific when I
No,
say goit?
it's I only know this from watching. I think it's Rob Grant, Ed Bye, and one of the other producers have been doing a few commentary type things on YouTube while they're all in lockdown, like we are at the moment. And one of them mentioned that goit is apparently a word for that, like hanging down bit of your throat by your Adam's apple.
Okay.
So you're telling me that I've got loose skin on my throat?
Quite possibly. I don't know.
Okay.
You are a piece of loose skin on my throat.
Yes.
You got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Still don't know what gimboid means, but I do like that one.
Wonderful.
Gimboid is actually a word I use a lot actually as well. It's you don't even think about it, do you? Just say it.
I'm going to go on a random tangent here and I don't care. When I first got into Red Dwarf, I borrowed Red Dwarf videos off my maths teacher. And
right, okay.
So after watching Red Dwarf, having swapped VHSs with my maths teacher, I started saying smeg in maths classes. And my poor maths teacher, it wasn't a good idea to swap VHSs with children thinking about it, bless him. But he had to take me to one side and explain to 12, 13-year-old me what smeg actually is.
I
didn't know.
No, I don't think I did for years. Interestingly, That was another thing I learned from that commentary thing that they were doing on YouTube that I watched earlier today. They actually got the word smeg from Tracy Ullman, who was also responsible for The Simpsons, because it was on the Tracy Ullman show. So she has been... I think basically they'd gone out for a meal for another show that they were doing with Tracy Ullman and gone to a Chinese restaurant and they'd got some kind of soup and she went, that looks like smeg. And they didn't know what it meant, so went and looked it up and went, well, if we don't know what that means, the censors probably won't either, and we might be able to use that in our script that we're writing at the moment. And they did, and it got past censors and it's fine.
Yeah, I always find it amazing on very separate levels that, one, what it actually means, and then two, that I cannot look at refrigerator without thinking about Red Dwarf.
Yep.
And then my second thought is, oh, why would you call your fridge freezer that? Yeah, so that works on so many levels when I see a smeg refrigerator.
They're awesome fridges, and I know, like, they're the top quality fridge. I just don't fucking want one.
No.
I do, because of Red Dwarf. But I can't afford one, so never mind.
So we're nearly at the end of the episode. Rimmer and Lister end up down in the cargo bay, and they discuss how Lister can have sons with no woman on board, and future Lister arrives and says, take a photo of this, here's your kids. Takes a photo, end of the episode. It leaves a mystery, and it resolves the whole episode, but it also leaves a mystery. Perfect fucking sci-fi.
Yes.
Yeah, and not only that, the fact that this mystery comes back again, and every time I hear those words where he says, it's going to be fun finding out, it's like, yeah, I always jump back to that episode and go, you said it'd be fun finding out. Well, here you go. And I just think that it's a brilliant payoff. I think that, this early on, that they're thinking that far ahead with, like, sort of just planting something in there. Now, yes, okay, fair enough. This episode was meant to be episode 4, but the fact that they leave that in there, I think, is brilliant. And the way they pay it off later on is fantastic.
Even if it was episode 4, it'd still be a series and a half later. I think it was the end of series 2, wasn't it? Yes, it was, because it was the start of series 3 where they explain it away with the Star Wars crawl.
We've got to the end of the episode of Red Dwarf itself. It is now time to talk about our favourite part of the episode. Colin, you're the guest. What was your favourite part of this episode? Future Echoes.
I mean, the bit where Lister's trying to come to terms with it, and there's the line, I've never had a prawn vindaloo. I've never read a book.
Yeah, I've never read a book. We're just expecting to say, I've never read books. It's like, I've never read a book. Yeah, I think that's a great line.
But then also Cat's rah dog attack is utterly fantastic as well.
Kurt, what about you?
Do you know what? There's so many. But I think on this particular episode, I've already mentioned Lunar City 7, so I'm not going to use that one because that's just my takeaway. I think that's my takeaway line that I use all the time. I think I'm going to go with the shaving cream and deodorant scene.
Yes.
Do you know, I didn't mention that, did I, when I was doing the run-through? But it's wonderful. It's so funny.
Yeah.
I think because it just gives you another layer of comedy because, with it's obviously you've got your satire, you've got your slapstick, you've got your emotional aspect, you've got your psychological humour, and then this one just playing purely for laughs. And I think that it's worth mentioning that, just the you're not expecting it, and when it comes out, it's like it's a great laugh out loud moment.
Yeah.
But it's also really useful for the mirror scene where he's not seeing his current reflection in the mirror because of that bit where he cuts himself and you can see the two. But the red blood is quite a visceral image, and it's really useful for, oh shit, he's just done that.
Yeah.
And that's really good too.
Absolutely. What about yours? Mark?
Well, you see, you two have picked really good stuff, but I am a child at heart. I am going to go with the fucking bouffant. It's just such a great gag. And then there's a callback at the end where he's got the bowl cut when he's pissed off Holly again. It's just so funny. And again, wanking over Chris Barry being such a good actor. And like you said, the way he kind of starts to become more feminine when he realises he's got a bouffant. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. Before we go, Colin, how can we find you on social media?
Okay, so my Twitter is @MogwaiFearSatan, which I forgot to say last week. And then my two podcasts are @WeDigMusicPcast and @This Month's Issue. And you can also find all of them on WeDigPodcast.com and obviously on the We Made This network.
Kurt, how about you?
You can find me on Twitter @RMuldrake, that's RMULDRAKE, which is a play on the X-Files character Reynard Muldrake, which is also a play on Fox Mulder. I like my meta. You can also find me on the Make It So podcast, which is a Star Trek universe podcast, focusing on the new universe of Star Trek with Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. And we'll be looking at Lower Decks as that comes in, and potentially the new Section 31 show. And that is @Jean-Luc Podard. That is the main places you can find me, and as well my main podcast as well, which is the Time Is Now pod, and that's a Millennium podcast, all on the TV show Millennium, which aired from 1996 to 1999. And then basically you can find me all over the We Made This network. So I wouldn't be surprised if I appear on some of the previous connections as we talk at the end of this episode.
And if you're looking for me, it's @MarkAdamsHC on Twitter. That stands for Humanist Celebrant. And if you are interested in that kind of thing, my website is www.humanist.org.uk/Mark Adams. My shows on the network are Life's Milestones @Life's Milestones, which is a show about life and birth and naming ceremonies, relationships and marriage, and funerals and death. My other show on the network is @Don't Say the C Word, which at the moment of recording is a temporary podcast during the COVID-19 situation where I talk to a different person about a different random thing every day of the week. And my other podcast is @Pull or Pass, which is a weekly geeky comic book show. So that is all we've got time for today on Shipwrecked and Comatose. So until next time...
She's not my type.
Elsewhere on We Made This. The giddy carousel of pop.
I opened the magazine. The bits that were nearly sticking out on page 3 were Simon Le Bon's
Bits.
lads. You know, one of the boys is nearly out the barracks there. I mean, if shorts had been any shorter. But how far apart are his legs? He looks like he's about to go into the maternity ward. How do they get them into these positions? Like, whose idea is it to say, Simon, sit on this stool here with the white satin sheet over it, lift one leg up really high, part the other knee as far away from it as possible, and look slightly to the right and pout.
And if you could just poke your left bollock back into your shorts.
Don't say the C word.
Why haven't we got lightsabers yet?
Yeah, I want one too. Unfortunately, you know where this is going, don't you?
I think so.
Right. The first problem you have with the lightsaber is that it's about a meter long and then the beam stops.
Right.
Can you see the problem with that?
Yeah, lasers have to hit something to stop, don't they? I did learn.
And you can't really stick a mirror at the other end of the lightsaber and just sort of it starts getting a bit silly.
The Movie Palace. And I think, I don't know about you, but I think Warren Beatty kind of exemplifies that new sentimentality in a way. And it's one of the reasons why I think he fitted very well with not just his role as Clyde, but his role as a producer. And if it wasn't for Warren Beatty, this film never would have been made.
Yeah, he's very interesting in that respect because he's a very hands-on kind of figure. And, you know, there are films like What's New Pussycat where he kind of backs out when it becomes clear he won't be able to exert that level of autonomy, for instance. Yeah, it's very true. And of course, he goes on to be a filmmaker, even an Oscar-winning filmmaker. I think he won the Oscar for Reds in towards the tail end of the era you're kind of covering on this podcast, really. So yeah, I think that's very true.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at wemadethispod.